Hey! You spooky little freaks. Happy Samhain. We're all cruising around here with a couple of different things coming up in the next little while. I'm not really in the spirit necessarily, except I think things have really gotten kind of spooky, right? Everything's gotten pretty shifty. This is a different world we're living in, right? My idea here with my plurality, most of you who've been following along understand I'm a multiple. If you don't by now, I'm in there somewhere around what's called either a median system, which is the terminology is otherwise specified dissociative disorder, or DID, dissociative identity disorder. That's still gaming back and forth a little bit, and I'm kind of all over the place. I went up to Canada in September, and the beginning of October I came back on the motorbike. Most of you have been following along, so this isn't news for anybody, but the shift, you know, like for one thing, I've been laid up, kind of hunkered down here in Fort Lauderdale for the last 2 years after my motorcycle accident. So I spun the motorcycle out. I broke a whole bunch of ribs in my shoulder blade and my clavicle, torqued my neck really good, bonked myself, I guess, with this crash. And after that, everything kind of tumbled out of me. All the multiplicity started to bubble up. And at first, it looked like my bipolar, which had been sort of rock steady, fairly slow moving over the years, had all of a sudden jumped up into mixed features, depressed in the morning, manic in the afternoon, all over the place, sometimes manic and depressed at the same time. All that's cranked up like crazy after my pretty much like a month and a half, 2 months after I came off all the narcotics in the beginning. I was really laid up for a while, so once I tapered off the narcotics, my sleep was crap, muscle relaxant, stuff like that. So everything's been kind of a mess for 2 years for me, and I've been kind of in a rut here. I've been kind of basically stuck, recovering, trying to get my head to kind of like be a little more forward facing and a little more consistent with things, and that's been a hell of a challenge. My executive functioning's just been it's been really tough, I mean, everybody's taking a shit kicking here in 2020, no doubt. I'm not complaining as far as all the crap that's been coming down the pike for everyone has been brutal. And I really see, I don't know if I can call it a light at the end of the tunnel, but I can see things shifting around enough right now for me that I'm starting to feel some optimism, or I'm starting to look at things a little differently. I'm still only getting 3 hours, average 3, maybe some nights 4 hours sleep a night, so I'm chronically exhausted. I've been worn out like crazy. Since getting back here in the last couple of weeks, I've had all of this pressure from my insurance company to do these evaluations, yada yada yada. It's been kind of a grind, right? So I'm looking at all of this stuff and I'm like, the categorization of what's happening for me is basically, if you want to like bare bones it, it's pretty much designed to compensate me or justify my disability at this point, right? And I mean, I've always been plenty crazy. I've always had some bipolar kind of like snaps here and there that have been pretty juicy. The fact that I've got the multiplicity now bubbled up on top of it just means that, you know, I'm out of commission. I can function on certain days, 30% maybe. And then there's other days where I'm a wipeout. I just can't even friggin' get half of that together. You know, I hesitate to be down on myself, or I hesitate to look at myself as disabled, because it still doesn't feel right to me. But I am struggling, right? Like, I have deficits. I'm not functioning in a lot of ways. So I need some kind of shift. I need something to change. And by now, like at the beginning of 2020, when I started to figure out all this multiplicity stuff, I thought, great, you know, here's the answer. This is what's going on. And I thought by now the alters would be smoothed out. There'd be more kind of like sophisticated kind of like workings of how things flow and getting stuff organized and feeling like maybe I'm getting on top of stuff. But that just hasn't really come around. I've barely been keeping it together some weeks, and I don't know how many of you know. I think the first year or two, maybe 3 or 4 for some people, adjusting to their multiplicity, particularly if it's like full-blown BID where you've got, you know, a couple of dozen alters, all kinds of trauma, all kinds of really high-end amnesia, where like you're blacked out for a day, and you know, the next morning you walk out and there's a new car in your driveway and it turns out you bought it yesterday. Like, I don't have any of that kind of really wild stuff going on, which is, I'm thankful for. Like, I look at it and I go, okay, you know, I seem to be at least on the Ryder side. Ryder's the straight guy, right? Ridicu over here is a little bit of a mixed bag. We're not sure what the hell's going on with him a lot of the time, but that's okay. I can kind of compartmentalize him and make him look twice before crossing the street. I don't know how. The big thing that's happened in this year is Ridicu has cooled his jets by about 80%, right? He's looked at me like Ryder, the straight guy, the adult, the sort of guy who pays the bills and tries to manage life. He's looked at me, I guess, and said, okay, you got to get used to this idea. I think he's been aware of it, and I think most of my other alters adapting to him as a different host are in a kind of a free-for-all. There's a lot of more of a what's the word I'm looking for? Like an organic thing happening over there with those guys. And I'm okay with that. I think it's great, and I kind of want to get back to that, because to tell you the truth, it's fun. Like, it's a lot more interesting and a lot more dynamic than what I got going on in my day-to-day, you know, just plugging away, trying to keep my scene rolling. The Ryder component is necessary, you know. I feel like what happened with Mark at 9 years old and patients at 12 years old deciding they didn't want to go on as adults, and forming Ryder and getting Ryder to kind of come out and be that sort of more adult, more responsible guy. And what Ryder's wound up becoming is like his own sort of person, right? Which sounds kind of strange if he was just popped out at you know, adolescence. But he has kind of developed into his own thing. He's also very much Mark and Patience. He has that kind of like makeup of those two, particularly those two people, who keep him on track, keep him functioning with the outer world, right? So the weird thing for Ryder, and this is something that we just figured out in the last couple months, like over the summer, is that he's the gatekeeper. he's the guy, because he's responsible and because he's the guy that's kind of a steadier influence on the whole, you know, Mishigosh here. What's happened is he can kind of more or less, not 100%, but more or less control things. And that's been a real awakening for me. I've looked at my inter-system communication. I've looked at that kind of, you know, questioning dynamic. What's going on? How can I smooth things out? What's to come that's, you know, more efficient or more functional, you know? Like, it kind of blows me away that I'm this bad for this long with no sleep, with kind of like, it's getting to the point where I'm reading stuff on, you know, prolonged lack of sleep stuff, like, you know, it causes early dementia, where you're like chronically not sleeping, and then, you know, it starts to eat your brain a little bit. I've tried, you know, before anybody jumps in and says, well, what about this? I've done most of the sleep hygiene stuff. I've tried a bunch of different medications. Medications for dissociative. I don't know that a lot of people are aware of this, and I've mentioned it a few times on my Facebook and I think on YouTube. Medications can actually make things a lot worse. If you are taking medications and you're dissociative and you've got littles and middles and things that are better for you, awesome, right? I mean, if medications work for you, if they're giving you a level of function that you would otherwise be struggling for, I'm not anti-medication, but I am very much looking at medications for me and for, I think, a lot of people as adjuncts that you need to use in a very subtle way, like very simple, very kind of like clean way. So basically I do magnesium, melatonin, valerian root at night with a couple of other sort of sleep hygiene things. And then sometimes a couple nights a week, I'll throw in some THC oil, which is great for the muscle spasm and the relaxation. I get, you know, instead of getting 2 or 3 hours sleep, I might get 3 or 4 hours sleep. And when I'm up for a couple hours at 4, 5, 6 a.m. and I eat something and I try to go back to bed, if I've got THC on board, I would say that I'm more likely to get another hour, maybe hour and a half of sleep from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. My sleep, my pattern for laying down is, I think I just do a lot of lucid dreaming. And lucid dreaming, I think, relaxes me. I think it kind of takes me out of my, you know, stress response. But I think there's also what happens to me at 3 a.m. when I'm wide awake. My neck's bugging me. I can't sleep. I got to change positions. I get up and I've got this kink in my neck, right? And there's a pinched nerve. So I can't sleep in one position for very long. So I wake up and I'm miserable. I change positions, you know, it doesn't do much because I'm now hyper aroused. And that's my little guy. That's Spider, the 2-month-old. This is coming to me like in chunks here and there. So this guy, for the first couple of months of his life, hung out in a newborn nursery alone, right? We were put up for adoption, but we had this huge head. So the hydrocephalus that eventually arrested, at 6 months of age, they cleared us off hydrocephalus and we were able to go out in normal adoption at 8 months of age. But a couple of months as a baby, probably in the nursery with you know, very little attention. It was the 60s, nobody knew about touch time or any of that stuff. Was kind of like minimal. What the medical foster care was like, I think, was probably good because my adoption notes talked about me being hypertonic as a newborn. And then after a few months in medical foster care, my hypertonicity, or my tense kind of like freaky kind of, you know, stiffness dropped down a little bit. So all that neurological stuff going on for me back then, all that probably pain, probably emotional freak out with like, I'm alone. I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning now, and that's what's going on for me. I've got this sense that I'm alone. I'm laughing about it because it's it's hard to talk about, right? Like I feel a little awkward about it, but it makes sense to me because I'm an RN and I'm looking at it like, well, what is my clinical picture and what am I missing? And when you're missing a clinical picture in real time in a hospital, or in some sort of crisis with family or friends that are having some tough time with things, and you can help them piece together things a little bit. And like as an RN, you got to watch it, right? Because you're not a doctor. You got to say, well, check with this guy, check with this guy. There's all these different features out there, but I'm hearing a lot about this. Did you look into this or whatever? So I'm kind of a natural detective, I guess, when it comes to health issues and my own problems. I'll generally, I would say, like 80% of the time work them out to a decent extent and get by okay with them. The whole picture for dissociative is you're a survivor. You figured out a way to get around all of these obstacles that have been put in front of you and make your way forward. And so, I just think, from what I can tell from hanging out with some people now a little bit, there's some really, really incredibly bright, extremely intelligent, very capable people with dissociative, and they've had to be that way because their environment has demanded it of them. This abuse, this kind of crazy trauma that goes on for some of these people, the way they have to kind of like shift things and create alliances within themselves and move things sideways and open things up to push things forward. It's kind of like, it's a crazy video game that a lot of us have had going on in our head for decades, where we're kind of like surviving. So I guess, what I'm coming around to here, the insurance stuff is a pain in the ass, right? I have to look at, I've got a long-standing psychiatrist, been seeing the guy for 8 years. Another psychologist I've been seeing for about 5 or 6 years, who's basically out of state now, minimally available to me. I've got this new trauma program at Nova Southeastern out here. They're geared very much towards integration. I get in shit, I think, for talking like this from some people, because they're like, oh, don't be down on integration. Some people really are into it. Yeah, I think the numbers are something like 12% of people actually integrate. That's your success rate with integration, as far as I know. Like, I haven't, broken open a bunch of studies and confirmed this like 100%. But integration's kind of a long shot, right? And I've been dealing with this stuff for over 50 years. So what are the chances that I'm gonna really like learn a whole bunch of new tricks as an old dog to get out of these brain patterns that I have? I don't see it. I've always thought what I'm going for is functional multiplicity. So I'm already on the Ryder side of median system, right? And I've been thinking about this. I've been trying to make myself look at this in different ways to say, okay, what's really going on? Like, what are the simple nuts and bolts of this stuff that are making me less functional all of a sudden, right? And this neurologist I'm seeing now, this guy's like, well, you basically got a head injury, and I can't argue with the guy. My functioning has gone from here down to here. I can't remember shit. I'm all over the place with different personalities at times. I do lose time. I'm not a lot, I don't think, but I'm dreaming most of the time, right? I'm not sleeping. It's just everything's kind of gone really sideways for me on this year. I think the first year after the accident, where everything was topsy-turvy, rolly, and I'm trying all these different medications and we're thinking it's mixed features bipolar, that was hell. That was like my hell year. But I didn't know I was a multiple at that point. I thought I was mixed features bipolar. So you just kind of do what you got to do and just keep shoveling medications and trying different things and all of this weird stuff. And then finally there was a point, I actually got in with a local guy here doing hypnosis, because I was like, man, there's something that's I'm just not getting. There's something like in my subconscious that's trying to tell me something or trying to make me change, and I'm not getting it. So I went and did like, I think 9 or 10 sessions with this guy over a couple of months, and then started the mushrooms last summer. And I've, you know, if you read up on psychedelics, what's happening with some of this latest new therapy out there, there's some really, really, really encouraging stuff. When you're using psychedelics responsibly with a good dose that's therapeutic, not like crazy gonzo doses that's, you know, everybody's getting flippy. You know, you're paying attention to the set and the setting, all of this stuff that kind of like really factors into having a successful shift with psychedelics. When you're doing it properly, you know, everybody goes, oh, psychedelics, oh, you know, you shouldn't be into drugs. And they're not, they're plant medicines, they're natural substances. They're nature's way of opening you up, you know, and ancient civilizations have been using this stuff for millennia to say, hey, you know, you're in a situation here with the tribe, you've got this cultural idea, but every once in a while we're going to kind of like open ourselves to the vastness of everything, right? And that's part of their ritual, part of their growth, and part of their connection to what's happening for them in their worlds. And we're missing that in modern life. We don't have really much connection to anything other than, you know, the job, the career, the household, you know, our hobbies, you know, what cable news channel you become addicted to, right? Like, we don't have a big vast picture of ourselves anymore. And I think what's been happening for me is I've always had a vast picture of myself. And I've always had a vast picture of myself because since I was, you know, this high, in my head, I'm making 5-way decisions, right? There's 2 hosts, Ryder and Ridicu. And Ridicu's kind of pumped out over time as well, kind of like before Ryder, actually, but always kind of like, you know, kept down, behave yourself, you know, go sit in a corner, you know, oh, you've gotten into shit again, you know. So basically, Ryder's the guy that's kind of like the fun, crazy fucker, and I should say Ridicu is that guy. Ryder's the guy that's kind of like, okay, we'll sort things out, we'll clean up the mess, and we'll try to move forward with a more standard approach, so we don't keep getting in shit and winding up in suspension or in jail or whatever, right? So in my head, through my whole childhood, I'm making these 5-way decisions, right? And thinking that's normal, thinking everybody thinks this way. And, you know, over time, as I'm older and I'm talking to people about different things and stuff I'm thinking about, people are looking at me and they're like, man, you really fucking overthink shit. Like, you really get into all of this weird stuff, and you're coming out of, you know, this whole quadrant of experience or ideas that nobody even gives a shit about. So leave that crap alone and just, you know, focus on, we're going hunting. You know, we got our shotguns, let's go get some ducks. You know, and I'm talking about whatever, all kinds of different stuff, because that's what my brain does. My brain's always rolling stuff over, always looking at different angles, always trying to fit different things, recognize overlaying patterns, all of that crap, right? So what's happened is, like, when you're, this is going back to the head injury stuff. When you're head injured, what happens? You've got some kind of a, let's say, a fragile vessel in your brain, right? Some kind of a arterial venous malformation, or something that's a delicate bit of tissue, a delicate bit of arterial or venous structure that's been there since birth, and you get knocked on the head and it splits or it cracks, and now you've got a bleed inside your head, right? Now, maybe somebody getting bumped on the head a couple of times, no big deal, right? Average people, they don't have that kind of like delicacy, that kind of like deformity or weak spot, right? So here's somebody who gets just a couple of bumps on the head and winds up with a stroke, pretty much. Whereas some other people might get bumped on the head 20, 50, 100 times and, you know, they're just fine. They don't have any kind of delicacy. What I've got is this overabundance of consciousness. I've been packing it back and smoothing it down and holding it into different spots and keeping it, you know, tucked away, and like dealing with it in a reserve, right? Like that's my hobby, is just to think. And then I'm like, okay, now I gotta do something. I gotta like get my shit together. Well, now instead of having like a loss of consciousness with this stuff, what I've got is an overabundance of consciousness. So what most people want is about this much consciousness where they stay on track and they get their stuff done. And I, you know, there are times when, believe me, I would love to just have this much consciousness and just get my stuff done. But I'm all over the place, and it's a different thing where I'm looking at this stage in my life where I'm like, okay, I have to deal with all this extra shit, and I need to package it somehow. I need to kind of like transform my footing and open my stance to manage juggling, you know, all these balls. Like I thought I had 3, now I got 7 or more, and I'm still trying to figure out what the hell's going on the Ridicu side. That to me has to wait. Like it's one of those things where I couldn't understand why I wasn't getting more feedback, more communication from that side as I've been going along here in the last 8 or 10 months. And what I've realized is I'm the gatekeeper. So I pushed that stuff over here and said, okay, quiet down, right? Like subconsciously, I'm making this effort to just try to manage and keep myself on track. Thank you very much. So I've been actually keeping a lid on this stuff. And I'm trying to figure out, and I asked the system just before my birthday. I said, what do you guys want for your birthday? And I'm not gonna go into it on this talk, but there's been some stuff that we figured out here in the last month since getting back home to Fort Lauderdale that we have to change in our life, that we have to make things different. And it's I think gonna work out. One of the things that seems to be a predominant problem for us right now is that 3 o'clock in the morning spider freak out. You know, we've been trying to figure out, okay, do we go get EDMR? I've been looking at some stuff online on it lately, more and more. I thought by now this stuff would all be rolling. Like a couple of big things happened this year. From like March until July, my university system just shut down. COVID just shut the whole thing down, right? No telehealth, nothing. So I'm floating around on my own trying to figure stuff out, trying to kind of patch things together. It's been a grind. The summertime, I get back on with some of my guys, and we're getting a few sessions, and we're getting things sort of like a little bit more better situated. And then my littles are like freaking out about, Mom, are we gonna see her again? Blah, blah, blah. So boof, I for 5 weeks, I booted up to Canada. And it turns out when I'm out of state, telehealth doesn't work for the university because they're only licensed within the state of Florida. So everything that you could do to delay a progress, delay some kind of like, you know, movement into your situation has cropped up for me this year. And I look at it and I think, you know, there are people out there who aren't even accessing care. There's a ton of dissociatives out there who are undiagnosed, you know, not very well managed. And one thing I gotta say, I'm coming up on 30 minutes here. This is a long one. I'm sorry, guys, but one thing I gotta say that I recognized, I think I've really kind of like made myself like give myself my head a shake, because I'm coming from the medical profession, right? I'm coming from a background in healthcare with these diagnoses, with this kind of awareness now. Like I'm now the patient, not, you know, just standing back and going, oh, well, you have to go to here and you have to do this and you have to do this. I'm looking at it and going, okay, what are some of the big inherent flaws in the way we're managing all these people with dissociative? And they're probably one of the most underserved populations out there. And I think the number one problem is that we call it dissociative identity disorder. Right there. 70% of the people I talk to, and I mention that name, and they're like, what's up? You know, and you'll hear like all kinds of academics and social work, people with the condition that are advocating for their peers talk about how we're kind of like not even recognized, and we're calling ourselves this great big crazy exotic name that nobody understands. And I've been going most of the time with multiple personality because everybody knows what that is, right? So if from the get-go you're using language that nobody understands, and then you turn around and you're kind of cranky about, well, no one recognizes us. You know, and I'm part of your kind of like system now, and I'm going, well, yeah, nobody recognizes us because we're using these fucking $29 words to describe a situation that's pretty common, that's out there like a lot. Like everybody dissociates to a certain degree. Attention deficit disorder is a form of dissociation, right? So it's like, if we got a better handle on talking about this stuff in terms that were easy, instead of like all this flowery language, we'd wipe out probably 70% of the ignorance out there around these problems. But as it is, we've become this boutique psychiatric condition, and I'm not even convinced this is a psychiatric condition, by the way. I'm not even convinced this is a disorder. I think it can be very, very dysfunctional when everything's floating around and out of control. But when you bring it into functional multiplicity, I think, and can track somewhat better. Like, remember when I was saying, oh, I want to be back to like tracking, you know, as a single person on a single mission? That's fine. Those people are like effective. But when you meet people who are multiples, or you have that idea that, you know, hey, this person's a little broader than your average bear, and they're tracking well, that's a powerful dynamic. That's a really cool thing. And I kind of think that if we're looking at this whole slip out of our humanity, out of our relevance, you know, we're constantly invalidating one another. I mean, that's what it boils down to. I think when you look at people who are multiple and they're functioning, you know, and they have that awareness that there's more than one way to skin a cat, that there's all these variables that they can manage and float, and they've got this high empathy, high emotional quotient, whatever you call it, EQ stuff. There's some people out there that are really, really, really dynamic and very, very powerful, right? Like, I've met a couple of people, I won't mention names, but that are managing their multiplicity after years of struggling. And, you know, you shake their hand and it's like, maybe they're only 5 feet tall, but it's like meeting King Kong. You can feel the energy and the sort of power that these people have, and you're like, wow, this is like really amazing energy, right? Like, I think multiplicity in its present form is a disaster, but I also think it's probably the key to how we evolve, or the key to how we expand our consciousness. It has a lot of inherent, built-in capability that we aren't managing well. We aren't exploiting it. We aren't figuring it out. We're kind of going, oh no, that stuff's pretty weird. We gotta keep that stuff over there. You know, those dissociative people. Oh yeah, that's crazy. We got, you know, we're gonna stay on track with our stuff here. And staying on track with your stuff when somebody else is staying on track with their stuff this way, and then somebody else is coming down here with this track, and, you know, up from the bottom of these tracks, and this is a fucking mess over here too. Everybody staying on their track is a fucking mess. What multiplicity does is it says, okay, everybody's on a different track. We'll sort it out, right? Like, it's kind of like you're your own United Nations rolling around in your own head, figuring out how to manage a bunch of different tracks. And people think that, oh, you know, those guys are crazy. You know, that's scary shit. Don't watch out for that stuff. It's scary because most people just hang off the tip of their nose with their sort of representative, highly ego-structured representative, right? And they're doing everything they can to keep that guy balanced. And you come along and you say, oh, you know, but actually that's just your representative. You've got all this other stuff going on behind you. Like internal family systems talks about everybody being multiple personalities. And they talk about this in terms of, no, having multiple personalities is not a disease. It's what everybody has. So it's your normal state of being. We're just not managing it very well. Now, when you start to hear this kind of stuff and you start to think to yourself, hold on a second, what if plurality isn't a disease? What if it isn't a disorder? I mean, don't get me wrong. I know it can present that way. I know we can all be dysfunctional and all over the place and looking like a complete spaz fest. But when you get it under control and it smooths out and you're moving forward with this wider concept stuff, it's really, really powerful, right? And everybody over here is talking about, well, you know, I got to be on my track. And then it's this guy, I got to be on this track. Oh, I got to be on this track. These guys over here on all their separate tracks are more of a disaster, 10 times more of a disaster than someone here who's functioning with multiple functionality, right? Because they're on all these different tracks, but they're making it work. So I really honestly believe multiplicity is the evolutionary jump that we're all about to make. I think that we're at the stage where we got to figure something out, right? Because all of this shit isn't working. I think this single track stuff has a utility, right? I'm not saying that these people are bad. I'm just saying they're fucking everything up too. And you're never gonna get, if you think about it, there's this idea out there, well, you know, we just got to have the right data and people paying attention to the right whatever search engines, right? Or the right keeping the information as streamlined as possible so nobody fucks up, right? Which is censorship. And nature, all of nature isn't designed to be censored. It's designed to kind of expand and be vibrant and kind of blow your mind, right? So we're trying to get everybody onto like 2 little tracks right here. And really, we're fully capable of being on 5, 10, 20, 100 tracks over here, if we paid attention to how multiplicity can take us out of all of this mess, right? Functional multiplicity. Because when you look at the kind of dysfunctional multiplicity, nobody wants to go near it. I think I'm going to cut it here. I think I'm going to tell you I love you guys. You know, I don't, there's parts of myself I've been discovering that are like hard, really, really kind of like strained and tight, twisted and withdrawn and, you know, ugly. Like they've just been kind of cramped up into their own little corner. It's like putting a kid on a timeout when they're 5 years old and then just leaving them in the corner for 50 years. What comes out of that corner isn't, you know, oh, great. Oh, God, that was a bit of a harsh timeout, you know, but thanks for letting me out. Now I'm ready to rejoin, you know, the whole effort. No, they come out of that corner all twisted up, all cramped up. They're in a bad spot, right? And so I'm figuring out, you know, okay, this weirdness, all this badness that everybody keeps talking about is out there for all of us. It's inside of us, brewing and festering in different ways. But once you start to unpack it and look at it and go, hey, you know, this is just poorly managed energy. It just needs to be smoothed out. It just needs to be opened up. It just needs to be given a chance for some breathing room and some dynamic and some expression, right? And validate it, even if it's wrong, even if it's kind of like backwards thinking. because like some of my little people are pretty immature. But I'm not telling them that. I'm telling them, look, you're making your way in the world now. You got to figure stuff out. And I'm here to kind of try to work with you on that. I don't know what I'm doing, right? I mean, I haven't really figured all this shit out for myself, but I can see that you're like behind me and struggling with where you're at. And I'm trying to open up and give you as much as encouragement and respect and honor as I can, right? And I'm seeing some decent results with that. So when I tell you guys I love you guys, I'm not trying to be like Joe Positivity or spooky flower child guy who's like all. I really actually think the more the merrier. All these differences we have are manageable. We just have to stratify ourselves a little differently, and we need to unstratify ourselves as well, right? Because we're so locked into certain positions that we're just constantly fighting. And I see this with other DID systems. I see people who are like, they're coming out with these 12 different people and they're all like competing and fighting for whatever reason. And I think it's probably, for me, it's because I don't have the horrendous trauma that a lot of people have. Like neglect is pretty bad, and it's really undermining in certain ways. But I dealt with a lot of the attachment issues. I dealt with a lot of that neglect stuff before I got into my multiplicity. Like when I was bipolar and having all of these attachment issues and stuff, and I'm looking at this stuff and I'm trying to figure it out. I got up on that game a little bit. So now when I'm coming into my multiplicity, it's like, well, okay, I got to figure this out. And I honestly believe, forget about dissociative identity disorder. I mean, that's the stupidest name going. Nobody knows what it means, right? What you've got, and I brought out some props here. I wasn't sure if I was going to use them. I'm over 40 minutes now. What the fuck? I'll tell you. You've got this narrow concept stuff, right? And by narrow concept, I mean like very, very sort of like directed and harsh and kind of like stay clean. We're going to cut this way. And this is all functional stuff. It's all has utility. But if it becomes too structured and too driven, then it confines people, right? And you all wind up having to drink out of the same glass. And cutting becomes kind of cutthroat after a while, right? So this kind of narrow concept utility stuff is okay, but it's not going to carry us. It's not going to get us through all this, right? And then what you've got is this kind of like medium concept stuff where everything gets blended and mixed. And I'll get into this in another talk, like another couple of weeks or something. I'll do another talk and I'll bring these out. But this medium concept stuff where we're blending things together and making things work a little differently, and we're like, science and technology and all this other stuff is kind of bouncing around in here, and we're going, woohoo, like that's opening us and making us more dynamic, right? Which is cool. But what we don't do, and people who think that they're getting into this medium concept stuff think that they're like, whoa, we're really shit hot. We've got all of this technology and science and advanced thought. I don't think you do. I think what you've got is a singlet or a narrow concept container that you're trying to carry medium concept stuff in. And this medium concept stuff, if it leans this way and it goes with your single container, your singlet ideology or your singlet thinking, your single track thinking, it can only do so much. But if this medium concept stuff gets opened up, and now we're looking at what's going into this, right? All the things that are around me, like just consider now the infinite and nature and everything that's around me. If this is leaning that way more, I mean, it still has to do this, right? It still has to pay attention to what's getting chopped up and managed on the ground in a practical way. But if it really opens to what's out there, and it really becomes more wide concept, then I think we're going to really see some movement in our consciousness. And if I had to, if it was up to me tomorrow, and everybody's like, you know what, Mark, you're a pretty good guy. We want you to name Rename dissociative identity disorder. What I would say is, these people are singlets. They're multiples, but they're functioning mainly as singlets, and they probably always will be singlets. Okay, that's okay. It's not a big deal. But don't give them all the responsibility for managing what's happening in everything. They need simple, direct sort of things happening for them, and they can function just fine with that. Medium concept stuff is where I live. Like, where, for whatever reason, Ryder has this median kind of ethic. And what I really want to tell you, you'll see stuff about mid-continuum. Plurality is on a continuum. So you've got the singlets over here and the full-blown DID all over the place over here. And that median section really is, I think, the biggest section. I think when you look at YouTube and you see these guys flipping around, showing you all their different personalities every few minutes, that's like 6% of the plural world that can do that. What you see the bulk of are people in the middle. So when you think plurality, and everybody goes, oh yeah, these guys that can switch personalities. No, it's more people who have really wide concept stuff that they're trying to function with in a medium fashion. That's, to me, the hidden giant in our evolutionary pool, is the median thinkers who can orchestrate and look at wide concept stuff. And these DID people who are like magicians, they're basically like gods in a lot of ways. When you get them on track and they're like functioning at that functional multiplicity, wow, you know what I mean? So this median stuff, I think it's where you need to sort of look at and focus a lot of energy right now. To go totally wide concept, to be like completely wide concept, where we're like infinite and nature and everything else around us can come in and kind of like influence us and get us kind of grooving, that's awesome. But we're not going to do it with the singlet mentality. We're going to need to open our consciousness, be able to take in more things. And this is what quantum computing is. Quantum computing is basically figuring out all these different channels with several different patterns. So in other words, not working on one pattern and then going, oh, well, this isn't working, and then trying another pattern, oh, well, no, this isn't working, and then, oh, trying another pattern, oh, well, no, this isn't working either. Quantum computing is trying all the patterns and opening up this magic solution because you've been massaging and working all of these patterns. Multiplicity is a form of quantum consciousness, right? And we're paying it very little attention because we think, oh, these guys are fucking crazy. You're missing the boat, You're a day late and a dollar short with your ideas on what constitutes fully actualized human beings. And you can keep doing it. I mean, I don't have a real big problem with this kind of thinking. If it's going to drive us into the ground, and it looks very much like it is going to, great. We'll just start over again in another couple 100 billion years. Spring up life on some other planet in some other sphere of existence. But while we're here and while things are kind of bubbling and we're looking at all this stuff and we've got this awareness and we've got an internet capability now, what if we started to really look at this multiplicity and said, hey, hold it, this is expanded consciousness. This is where we need to go. So I would call basic. Narrow concept, medium concept, wide concept. So if you can function wide concept, we need you to look at some things in some very unusual ways to figure some shit out that a lot of these guys are stuck and they can't figure it out. You know what I'm saying? we're in a position we're in because our backs are against the wall. We've painted ourselves into a corner. Nobody knows how to get the fuck out of this corner, right? And everybody's trying this at different angles. Well, maybe this way, maybe that way, maybe this way, maybe that way. No, it's like this thing's spinning like so fast that you can't even see it anymore, all bubbling around in here in this median existence where you are still next to, still proximal to the singlet idea. But then you're opening it and you're allowing this wide concept stuff to come in and inform you. Hey, yeah, okay, you're figuring this out. You're starting to twirl that. You're starting to move that around like a baton, right? You're not trying to stick it in people or cut people or do things that are ugly. You're starting to figure out that this is dynamic, not just destructive. And here's where we're at. This is when we start to open up and start to figure stuff out. If we look at multiplicity with what it is, it's expanded consciousness. Love you guys.